They say family is supposed to be your first safe haven. The people who shield you from storms, who hold you when the world lets you fall. But what happens when the storm brews within your own home? When the very people who should love you the most are the ones who hold the knife? My name is Eliza Grant. And the day my father looked me dead in the eyes and told me I no longer belonged to the family I was born into, something inside me shattered, and something even deeper woke up. It all began a month before my 29th birthday, the first one I'd be spending without my mother. She passed away the previous summer, and with her went the last sliver of warmth left in our household. I was the youngest of 4 children, 2 older brothers and a sister, each of them wrapped in our father's approval like golden cloaks. I, on the other hand, was the one who questioned things, the one who didn't settle for blind obedience, the one who didn't laugh at his cruel jokes or look the other way when he belittled Mom. He never liked that. Mom used to whisper in my ear when I cried as a child, "You have a wildflower soul, Eliza. They won't understand you. But don't let them pull your roots." I didn't understand it back then. But now, sitting in the family's grand lake house for a so-called reunion without her, I understood everything. The room was full of fake smiles and half-drunk champagne. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, carving up the conversation like he owned not only the house, but our attention. My siblings laughed along with him, dressed in designer clothes, sipping vintage wine he kept for special occasions. I arrived late, not because I meant to, but because I had stopped by Mom's favorite garden just outside of town. It was my way of breathing before stepping into the lion's den. As I entered, I felt the change in atmosphere. My sister Amanda raised an eyebrow, my brother Todd barely glanced up from his phone, and Nathan, the eldest, gave me that trademark smirk that meant I was already the target of some joke I hadn't heard yet. Dad looked up, glass raised. Well, the prodigal disappointment arrives," he said with a laugh that cut through me like glass. Everyone chuckled, everyone but me. I took my seat silently, refusing to let my hands tremble. This was Mom's favorite holiday, the spring equinox. She believed it was the true new year, when things grew again, when what had died could bloom. The irony of them choosing this weekend for a family dinner, after everything they'd done, felt cruel. The meal dragged on, tension laced between the clinks of forks. Then, just as dessert was served, Dad stood. He cleared his throat and looked around the table with mock sentimentality. "I want to raise a toast," he began, "to my children, to Todd, who's built a real estate empire, to Nathan, who just closed a deal with one of the biggest firms in the state, to Amanda, who's making waves with her influencer brand." He paused. Everyone turned to look at me, waiting for my mention. He smiled, not warmly, but like a knife polished before use. "And to Eliza." The room froze. Dad swirled the wine in his glass and added, "Actually, no. There's nothing to toast there." Silence. Then he laughed, like it was some punchline. I felt the blood drain from my face. Amanda bit her lip, trying not to laugh. Nathan looked pleased. Todd raised his glass anyway, probably hoping to avoid eye contact. "I've made a decision," Dad continued, placing his glass down. "And we've talked about this. Me, your siblings. We voted. You're not part of this family anymore." My heart thudded in my ears. "What?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "You've been distant, uncooperative, ungrateful. You've rejected every offer I've made to help you get back on track. So, it's done. The family votes were unanimous. We're cutting ties, financially, emotionally, officially." I felt every eye on me. No one protested, not one of them. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my breathing even. "And Mom?" I asked. "What would she vote?" He hesitated. "She's not here to vote anymore," he said coldly. That was it. I walked out without another word. No tears, no screams, just silence. And in that silence, something grew. Something ancient. Something powerful. Mom always said I had her fire. That day, it finally lit. 3 months later, an unexpected letter from Mom's lawyer arrived. Apparently, before she died, she made amendments to her estate. Privately. My name was the only one on the trust. She had left me everything she inherited from her grandmother's side, a portfolio of land, antique holdings, and 49% of the family's event venue business, a place my father believed he owned entirely. With my name on the board and her share transferred to me legally and irrevocably, I became the second largest stakeholder. And now, I had a plan. The day I signed the documents transferring ownership of my late mother's assets into my name, I felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just money. It was power. Quiet, inherited power that had been tucked away like a secret, waiting for the right moment. My mother had always played her cards close to her chest, not because she was weak, but because she was patient. And now, through me, her voice was louder than ever. I didn't rush into confrontation. That's what they would have expected. That's what Dad was used to. Heat-of-the-moment arguments, dramatic exits, tension that fizzled out by the next weekend. But not this time. This time, I moved in silence. I started attending board meetings at the family business, an upscale event venue called the Marlowe Estate, known for its luxury weddings and elite clientele. My father had always believed it was fully his, a pride project he took from a rundown mansion to a $1 million operation. What he didn't know was that my mother had quietly acquired her shares through a trust passed down from her grandmother, who was part of the original landowners. It had never been about public recognition. It had always been about security. For me, when I walked into the first board meeting, Dad looked at me like I was a ghost. My siblings sat stiffly in leather chairs, unsure whether to speak or pretend I didn't exist. I calmly placed my documents on the table. I'm here in my capacity as 49% stakeholder, I said simply. Dad scoffed. That's impossible. The lead attorney, a man who had worked for the family for over 20 years, cleared his throat and read the amendment. It was airtight, legally signed, notarized, and recorded before my mother's passing. There was no loophole, no technicality to fight. You should have read the bylaws more carefully, I added, matching his glare. Your wife was smarter than you gave her credit for. The meeting continued in stony silence. Afterward, Todd approached me. What's your angle, Eliza? No angle, I replied. I'm just here to vote. And I did, on everything: budgets, hiring, expansion plans, charity work. I vetoed frivolous spending, redirected funds into community engagement programs, and halted a plan that would have laid off half the junior staff just to upgrade the wine list. Every decision I made was professional, strategic, clean, but it chipped away at him. Each time my father tried to flex authority, I responded with quiet facts and calm counterproposals. The board began to listen. To me. Not because they liked me, but because I was right. Because I had my mother's poise, not his bluster. And then, the twist I didn't see coming. At the next quarterly review, the attorney informed us that there had been one final clause in my mother's estate plan. Upon the occurrence of gross misconduct by the current CEO, the secondary stakeholder could motion for a vote of no confidence and appoint new leadership. Gross misconduct. It sounded vague until someone finally leaked records of hush payments made to a former employee who had accused Dad of harassment. Records he thought had been buried. Records I never would have found if Amanda hadn't sent them anonymously. I didn't confront her, not yet. But the message was clear. The family was cracking, and I was holding the chisel. 2 weeks after the leaked record surfaced, the Marlowe Estate boardroom was filled with thick tension. A special meeting had been called. On the agenda, A vote of no confidence in my father's role as CEO, the man who had once stood over me with a gavel in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other, declaring me a disappointment in front of the people who should have protected me, was now fidgeting in his chair, like a child about to be sent to the principal's office. I hadn't wanted to bring him down. Not at first. A part of me still clung to the faintest hope that he'd meet me halfway, acknowledge my efforts, admit his failures, find some scrap of humanity buried under all that pride. But watching him deny, deflect, and gaslight his way through that meeting tore that hope to pieces. When the vote was called, Amanda surprised everyone by being the first to raise her hand. I vote no confidence. Todd hesitated. Then slowly, he raised his hand too. Nathan looked back and forth between us like a gambler who just realized he backed the wrong horse. He didn't vote. Coward. The board's final vote came through. 5 in favor, 2 abstentions. My father, the man who told me I didn't belong to this family, was removed as CEO. He stood slowly, trying to mask his humiliation with mock amusement. So this is your revenge, Eliza? No, I said without blinking. This is accountability. You don't get to destroy the family and keep the company too. Later that day, Amanda asked to meet me at a cafe just outside the city. It was a quiet place with old wooden booths and sunlight filtering through dusty windows. She arrived without makeup, without the usual smugness in her voice. She looked tired and real. You were right, she said, stirring her tea. About everything. I didn't do it to be right, I replied. She looked down at her cup. I sent those files, the hush money receipts. I knew he was hiding something, but I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. I didn't think you'd help, I said, my tone softer than expected. I always resented how he treated you, she admitted, but I was too scared to say anything. And I wanted to keep his approval, until I realized it was never enough. No matter what I did, it was never enough. We sat in silence for a while. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was me, maybe 8 years old, sitting on the front porch with our mom. I was showing her a painting, and she was smiling like I'd handed her the Mona Lisa. She always knew, Amanda said. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. That night, I walked through the halls of the Marlowe estate, now empty of the chaos that used to fill it. I paused in the grand ballroom where Dad once threw parties to celebrate himself. The chandeliers sparkled above me, reflecting memories I didn't want, but couldn't escape. And then, an idea bloomed. What if I turned this place into something different? Something Mom would have been proud of? I started sketching plans for a rebrand. Not just aesthetics, but purpose. A venue dedicated to second chances. Women-owned vendors. Mental health workshops. Support for foster youth aging out of the system. A community-driven healing-first space. It wouldn't erase the past, but it would reclaim it. And that was just the beginning. The rebranding process didn't just transform the estate, it transformed me. Each decision I made was like peeling away layers of hurt that had calcified over the years. I renamed the venue Hearth and Grace in honor of what Mom used to say when we decorated for winter. Every hearth needs grace to feel like home. We kept the architecture, but stripped the pretension. Out went the exclusive packages that only catered to the elite. In came tiered options that allowed nonprofit galas, working-class weddings, and women-owned startups to host their most important moments in a space that now breathed meaning. I started meeting with community leaders, artists, survivors, people who had stories that mirrored mine in ways I never imagined. Women who'd been cast aside by family, friends, even children, who'd clawed their way back from betrayal and grief. Every time one of them thanked me, I thought of Mom. I hoped she could see what had bloomed in the cracks left behind. And then came the letter. A thick envelope stamped with a lawyer's insignia. My father was challenging the vote, filing an appeal to reverse the board's decision on the grounds of emotional sabotage and family manipulation. His words, not mine. At first, I felt the old panic rise in my throat, that sense that he'd always find a way to control the room. But this time I didn't tremble. I passed the letter to my attorney, a brilliant woman named Mariah, who specialized in corporate justice and who had once been ousted from her own family's business for being too assertive. Mariah smiled. "He's playing with broken cards. Let him file. I've handled worse men in court." The case didn't even make it to trial. The judge dismissed it after a single review of the board's minutes and the evidence of misconduct. The lawyer representing my father didn't even show up for the second hearing. He had nothing to stand on. But what stunned me most was what came next. Nathan showed up at the venue. He didn't schedule a meeting. He just walked into the garden where I was overseeing a floral arch being built for an upcoming trauma survivors retreat. "Can we talk?" he asked, standing awkwardly beside the marigolds. I hesitated, but nodded. We walked the length of the garden in silence before he finally spoke. "I didn't vote. That day in the boardroom, I froze. I was angry, not at you, but at myself." I didn't say anything. He continued. "Dad used to say you'd never survive without us, that you were too soft, too naive, too emotional. But you're the only one who turned all of that into something real. I've spent my life chasing titles. You built something that actually matters." I turned to him. "Why now, Nathan?" He looked down. "Because I'm tired of pretending like I didn't know better, and I want to be better." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. I walked him back toward the main entrance and pointed to the portrait, now hanging above the reception desk. It wasn't of Dad or any of us. It was of Mom, standing on the steps of the estate, her arms wide open, her face full of fierce joy. "She always saw what you all refused to," I said. I just had to learn how to see it too. And now I did. The local press got wind of what I was doing at the estate. At first, just a small lifestyle blog wrote about Hearth and Grace, calling it an inspiring reimagining of old wealth turned toward new purpose. Then came a feature in the Sunday paper. Then a call from a nationally syndicated women's network. Within a few months, what started as a passion project to reclaim my voice became a movement. People wanted to visit. They wanted to host. They wanted to heal. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, my family started to fracture in ways I hadn't expected. Amanda divorced her husband. She never said it out loud, but I knew why. He reminded her of Dad, controlling, entitled, dismissive. She started dropping by the venue on weekends, helping decorate for events or fold program brochures. She didn't need the money. She just needed the space to be seen without having to earn it. Todd, on the other hand, wasn't ready to unravel. He was still bitter, still loyal to Dad, even as the man spiraled further into isolation. Every time I saw Todd in passing, at charity events, city meetings, his nods were cold and his words clipped. But that was fine. Not every sibling has to come back from the war. Some stay in the trench forever. I was learning to accept that. What I didn't expect, though, was the call from my father. It came in the middle of a planning meeting for an art therapy event we were hosting in the ballroom. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I stared at the screen, DAD still flashing like some unfinished sentence. Then I answered. His voice was hoarse, not the booming baritone that used to make waiters flinch and toddlers cry. This was the voice of a man who had been left behind. "Eliza," he said. I didn't respond. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he added, "but I wanted to talk. Not about the company, not about the vote, just about your mother." A long pause. She would have been proud of you, he said. My breath caught. Don't use her memory as leverage, I replied. You don't get to twist her into something now that she's gone. I'm not, he said quietly. I'm just saying. I think she knew what she was doing. And I didn't. I didn't understand her. And I never tried to understand you either. I thought strength meant silence. I thought control meant love. But I was wrong. Another pause. I don't expect forgiveness, he added. I just wanted you to know I've started therapy. And that I'm sorry. For the vote. For everything. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream, but I just said, I have a meeting, and ended the call. Then I cried in the garden shed for 15 minutes straight. Grief is strange. It doesn't always come when someone dies. Sometimes it shows up in the moment you realize how much of your life was spent trying to prove you deserve to be treated like a person. I didn't call him back, but I didn't block his number either. Autumn settled in like a deep sigh over hearth and grace. The maple trees surrounding the estate lit up in flaming reds and golds, the kind of beauty that demands stillness. And for once, I allowed myself to rest, not because the work was done, but because I'd earned it. Our fall calendar was fully booked. Weddings, recovery retreats, nonprofit galas. Every event had purpose stitched into it. No surface-level gloss. No hollow champagne toasts about empty success. Just people, community, meaning. But healing is never a straight road. One evening, as I walked through the East Garden after a late team meeting, I found a box sitting on the porch steps. No name, no note, just a navy blue ribbon tied neatly across the top. Inside was a scrapbook, old family photos, ones I'd never seen before. Mom, young and laughing, pushing me on a swing. Amanda and I in matching pajamas. A rare candid of Dad and me in the kitchen. Me maybe 6 or 7, standing on a stool as he helped me whisk pancake batter. He looked happy in that photo. I didn't remember that day. Tucked inside the back sleeve was a folded piece of paper, my mother's handwriting. It wasn't dated, but the ink was faded and the fold lines worn. Eliza, if you're reading this, it means things happen the way I feared they might. I always tried to protect you, not just from others, but from thinking you had to fight alone. You don't, you never did. You are my wildflower, and wildflowers don't just survive. They bloom where others can't. Keep blooming, my girl. One day, even the ones who buried you will wish they had watered you instead. Mom. I pressed the note to my chest and sank to the floor. The estate was silent, but I swore I could hear her voice in the wind chimes outside. I didn't need her permission. But oh, how much it meant to be reminded that I had her blessing. That night I called Amanda. You dropped off a scrapbook? No, she said, but I wish I had. Nathan? The next day, a florist who'd been working with us on a Veterans Memorial event approached me with a sheepish look. I hope you're not upset, she said. An older man dropped off that box yesterday. Said he wanted you to have it, but didn't want to see you face to face. He seemed humbled, a little broken, honestly. I knew it was Dad. I didn't reach out. But now I saw him differently. Not as an unstoppable tyrant, but as a man finally beginning to understand the wreckage he created. The most powerful revenge, I realized, wasn't in watching him fall. It was in becoming someone he couldn't control, couldn't dismiss, couldn't deny. Someone who stood taller because of the pain, not despite it. And I wasn't done rising yet. The first time I returned to the family estate after reclaiming my rightful inheritance, the gates creaked open slowly, as if reluctant to welcome me home. But I wasn't the same person who had left this place in the back of a rideshare van with a single suitcase and a lifetime of grief. I wasn't walking through those gates as a daughter begging for acknowledgement. I was walking in as the owner. The decision from the court had been delivered just weeks before, and after uncovering years of financial manipulation and fraudulent signatures on trust documents, the estate, both legally and symbolically, was mine. I walked up the long stone path flanked by cherry trees, now blooming as if mocking the cold welcome I once knew here. The house looked the same, but it felt entirely different. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a memory palace filled with ghosts. And one by one, I was going to walk through every room and make peace with them. Inside, the air still smelled like old furniture and forgotten holidays. I passed the hallway where Dad's legacy wall hung. Photos of him shaking hands with donors, newspaper clippings that celebrated his so-called community leadership. But nowhere on that wall was my mother. Not once, as if she had never existed. As if her quiet sacrifices didn't hold up the entire foundation of this house. I took them all down, every photo, every frame, every fabricated accolade that told a one-sided story. I replaced them with things that mattered. Letters my mother had written, a framed copy of her original will, and a photo of us at the beach when I was 5, before the world taught me to shrink. I stood in the dining room, the very one where they once sat me at the corner chair and voted me out. The same room where Dad raised his glass and said he was proud of everyone here, except her. I could still hear the ice in his voice, still feel the sting of my sibling's silence. That chair was still there, pushed slightly out from the table, as if it had been waiting. So I burned it. Not dramatically, not vengefully. I took it out to the fire pit in the back garden, doused it in lighter fluid, and watched it turn to ash. That chair had carried my shame for too long. It was time it held something useful. Flames that warmed, not words that wounded. Then came the moment I didn't expect. As I walked upstairs to the master bedroom, once my parents', I found something I'd never seen before. A jewelry box tucked inside the closet, buried behind winter coats. Inside were a series of handwritten notes, folded neatly, tied with ribbon. Each one was addressed to me. They were from my mother. I know they try to make you feel like you don't belong, but don't let them. You shine too bright. That's why they squint. If they ever cast you out, don't beg to come back in. Build your own house. The trust is for you. I changed it before I passed. If they try to say otherwise, you fight. Tears streamed down my face as I sat on the floor, surrounded by a lifetime of love I was never meant to find. My mother had tried to protect me, even in silence, even from the grave. And my father had buried her voice just like he buried mine. Not anymore. That week, I began the transformation of the estate. I hired women-owned contractors. I brought in local artists to paint murals of forgotten women in history. The bedrooms were turned into retreat spaces for estranged daughters who needed somewhere to land. The attic became a library filled with stories of resistance, power, and healing. And the room where they voted me out, that became a voting room, but not for family verdicts. It became a place where young women voted on grant proposals, education fund recipients, and shelter expansion plans. Their voices mattered here now. And the best part? I didn't tell my father a thing. I let him hear about it from the same community newsletter that once featured his face on every page. Now that newsletter showed my name under the headline, "Former heiress turned advocate reclaims family estate and opens doors for thousands." He tried calling. I didn't answer. He sent a letter. I mailed it back, unopened, with just one line written on the envelope. "We've all voted. You don't get to speak here anymore." And with that, I walked back into my mother's garden, planted a new rose bush beside the old one, and whispered to the wind. They voted me out, but I never stopped growing. The house was nearly complete. Not the house my father built with secrets and silence, but the one I rebuilt with intention and memory. The estate was no longer a monument to his ego. It was a sanctuary stitched together with stories like mine. The irony, in reclaiming what was mine, I had created something that belonged to everyone but him. But one storm hadn't passed yet. I was sitting in the newly converted sunroom, once my father's private office, reviewing grant applications, when my assistant walked in with an expression I hadn't seen before. "There's someone at the gate," she said cautiously. "He says he's your uncle." 2 weeks later, Hearth and Grace was no longer just a place of quiet restoration. It was now the beating heart of a story that had echoed far beyond our small town. The marquee outside the building read in bold gold letters, "The Vote, a night of reclamation and recognition. Invitation only." And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same people who once voted me out of my own family now watched from the outside, unable to enter, unless I chose to open the doors. But this time, the vote was mine, and mine alone. The night of the event, cameras lined the sidewalk. Local news vans were parked near the entrance, and whispers followed guests as they walked in. Lawyers, journalists, authors, women's rights advocates, and survivors of estrangement and abuse, all here because they'd heard about a woman who was disowned by her family and responded by buying back her power. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with white roses and soft golden lighting. But there were no chandeliers or luxury ego traps like my father used to install. Everything was intentional, humble, and clean, powerful. The centerpiece of the room was a long black wall etched with stories, anonymous messages written by women who had been cast aside by their own families. I stood behind the curtain, breathing deeply. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I was ready.
When I stepped onto the stage, there was a strange hush, not the kind that feels like pressure, but the kind that feels like reverence. I began my speech not with triumph, but with truth. I was 13 when I first realized love in our house was conditional, I said, my voice steady. When I tried to speak, they told me I was too dramatic. When I tried to shine, they said I was making everything about me. When I cried, they said I was weak. When I stayed silent, they said I was cold. And eventually they just said I didn't belong. I let that hang in the air. They voted me out, I said, looking around. They chose to treat me like a burden, not a daughter. But what they didn't know was that I would take everything they threw away and build something better. People clapped. Some cried. I told them everything. The vote, the betrayal, the stolen inheritance, the eviction, the cruel toasts, and the silence that followed. But then, the ballroom doors creaked open. A few heads turned. And standing there, looking just as stunned to see all these faces as they were to see him, was my father. He wore a crumpled suit, shoes dusty, shoulders slumped. His presence sucked the air out of the room. People stared. Some leaned in. Others whispered. He didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes fixed on me, like he couldn't recognize the woman I'd become. I could feel every heartbeat in the room as I made a choice. I turned back to the audience. I used to think this story was about being cast out, I said. But it's really about choosing who gets to define you. I walked to the side of the stage, over to a dark curtain no one had noticed yet. I pulled it back to reveal 3 objects mounted on a vertical display. The original eviction notice from the house, signed by him. A photograph of the boardroom table where they voted to strip me of my rights. A notarized copy of the updated trust, showing my mother's final amendment naming me as the sole beneficiary. The crowd gasped. I turned to face my father, no longer a child begging for approval, but a woman standing in the full light of her worth. Everything you took from me, I said, became a lesson. Everything you withheld made me build something stronger. And everything you tried to bury me with, I used it to grow. He opened his mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to apologize, but I raised a hand. I'm not doing this for your redemption, I said calmly. I'm doing it for every daughter who was told she didn't matter. I'm doing it for my mother, who never got the justice she deserved. And I'm doing it for the woman I became, because of the fire you set beneath my feet. He stood there, blinking slowly, like a man drowning in the reality he created. Then quietly, almost sheepishly, he walked to one of the empty chairs in the back of the room and sat down. The rest of the night carried on. I finished my speech. Guests approached me in tears. Some handed me letters. One elderly woman whispered, "I haven't spoken to my daughter in 12 years. I think I'm ready to listen now." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about me anymore. I wasn't the only one who'd been voted out. I was just the one who decided not to stay gone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the high windows of Hearth and Grace, casting long golden rays across the polished wood floors and white velvet chairs that had hosted a night of unforgettable truth. I walked the room barefoot before anyone else arrived. Just me, the scent of lilies still in the air, and the sound of distant birds waking up. I ran my fingers across the etched wall of stories from women across the country. One quote caught my eye. "They erased me from the family photo, so I built the frame where others could belong." That wasn't mine, but it felt like it was written for me. A soft knock came at the back door. It wasn't my staff or the press. It was Amanda, my sister. The same sister who had voted me out. The one who once told me, "You make things harder for everyone." The one who laughed when Dad removed me from the trust. Now she looked different, not polished, not perfect, just small. "Can I come in?" she asked. "You already are," I replied, stepping aside. She walked through slowly, scanning the space. This is beautiful," she said. "Mom would have loved this." I didn't say anything. I just let the weight of that sentence settle. Amanda finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stand up to him. I thought if I sided with you, he'd turn on me too." I studied her face. For the first time in years, it wasn't full of pride or competition. It was full of regret. And for once, it felt real. "I forgive you," I said, "not because you've earned it, but because I've let go of needing anything from you." She nodded. Tears welled up, and she left without asking for more. Later that week, I received a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a legal letter from my brother Todd. No apology, no letter, just a single typed sentence on a sticky note. Maybe I was wrong. I smiled. That was all he could offer, and that was all I needed. But the story didn't end with their regret. It ended with what I did next. I turned Hearth and Grace into a living movement. We created the Daughters Fund, a nonprofit that provided scholarships, therapy, housing, and legal aid to young women estranged from abusive families. We helped dozens escape oppressive households, get their GEDs, launch careers, or simply find somewhere they weren't called too much or ungrateful. Every wall of the estate that once silenced me now held paintings, photographs, and stories from women who had found their voice right here. On the 1-year anniversary of the vote event, I hosted a private dedication. The marble garden outside had been transformed into a sanctuary of peace and memory. At its center was a fountain carved from stone reclaimed from the original family estate, the one my father had mortgaged away years ago. Water danced softly from the top, over words etched in steel. Voted out. Rose anyway. And beneath that, buried in a sealed glass capsule under the earth, I placed something personal, a letter to my younger self. I want you to read it too. Dear me, you did nothing wrong by being honest. You did nothing wrong by being loud. You did nothing wrong by demanding better. You were always enough. And the ones who told you otherwise? They were never the authority on your worth. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are not hard to love. You are fire. You are roots. You are storm and sky and survival all in one. And someday they will remember you, not as the one they cast out, but as the one who never let them keep you down. Love always, the woman you became. I stood above the plaque as guests began to gather, some of them survivors, some family members who'd healed, others just people who came to witness a story that reminded them they too could rise. And then someone asked, What would you say to your father now?
I smiled, steady and unshaken.
I'd say thank you, I answered. He tried to erase me, and in doing so, he made me unforgettable.